So today, what I want to talk about is the operational challenges of community solar. Before that, let me just quickly introduce Hansen. Hansen Technologies has been in the business of billing and customer service across the world for the last 40 plus years. And what we do is pretty much concentrate on billing and CIS related activities for energy, telecommunications, and pay TV. And we have a staff of over 1,200 people distributed across the world. And what that allows is that we get to learn from the best parts of the world in terms of the best practices. And as you know, renewable energy has been far ahead of the United States in several other parts of the world, and I've had the benefit of being able to learn from those parts as well. So what is community solar? Community solar, the Department of Energy defines community solar as shared resources of solar generation, where a community of people share in the generation as well as the financial benefits of the power that is generated. And these manifest in multiple forms. Commonly, there are what they call solar gardens as opposed to solar farms. Solar farms are the large ones, and the solar gardens are the little ones. As well as in places like Massachusetts, the government has gotten together, for instance, where they put solar panels on a small, on not all of them, some of those buildings, but then that's owned by everybody. And you share so there are hosts and there are subscribers, and the subscribers outnumber the hosts, and you share the benefit of that solar generation. And as you can tell, this is the forecast from NREL, National Renewable Energy Labs. As you can see, the growth has been pretty significant, exponential growth in the last few years, and that trend is expected to continue for a while. And there are lots of reasons for this, because what community solar allows you to get the benefits of renewable energy without having to make capital investments or any kind of onerous mechanisms. And in order to make that work, by the way, there are people who believe that the whole business of community shared owned people, shared solar is probably going to be as transformative in this market as deregulation was about 20 years ago. So this is very much a growing trend. So in order to play in this market, there are a few things you have to do. You have to acquire customers, obviously, and then you have to manage the lead time that is involved in getting all the permits and actually putting up the solar garden. And you have to work with the utility in terms of being able to connect it to the utility and do all of the paperwork that is necessary. And then, of course, finally, you have to do things like billing, collections, and so on. So I'll very quickly step through these various steps and what the challenges are. Customer acquisition. I mean, you can go, you go and try to sell to the customers. However, there are lots of regulatory policy issues that make the job hard on you. To start with, you have to have the right set of products. And the older, one of the early business models that was tried by people like Solar Shares was actually try to sell you shares, but that didn't work because SEC has strict rules about who can and cannot participate in that kind of investment process. So the new method is selling you subscriptions, whether they be short-term or long-term, meaning some of them sell you 20-year subscriptions, and some of them basically sell you no terms, 1-year subscriptions, whichever it is. And there are pricing mechanisms, which is fixed price, meaning you pay a fixed price every month. In return, you get the credit for your portion of the solar generated. Or there are also variable or guaranteed savings, which is you pay a percentage of the savings that you actually get for each month. And so obviously, in order to come up with that, you need to be able to manage the risk behind that kind of an offer. And also there are further criteria where in most of the states outside of Texas, obviously, you have the community. They take the word community seriously in the sense that the ownership should be limited to geographic proximity of the customer's residences. By the way, this residences or commercial establishments. And there are also limits on how much can be owned by any one particular subscriber. And so you start selling, you go through all of this, so your sales cycle itself is long enough. And after that, you have to get in order to start the permit process, most of the states, you require a minimum threshold. In other words, X% of the subscription should be sold before they even start allowing you to apply for a permit. And then you apply for the permit. Now you get to make sure the financing credentials are, financing hurdles are passed. And you have actually got to build the thing. Now, building the thing, one would expect these days should be a slam dunk. Unfortunately, because we've been doing it for a long time, unfortunately, it's not, because the National Energy Code, National Energy Code, NEC, is writing and rewriting the rules for interconnections of these solar farms with the grid, because they're worried about resiliency and reliability. And finally, you have the problem with a lot of this. Solar has been made possible by what's known as ITC, investment tax credits, and production tax credits. And so now you're racing the tax calendar. So guess what happens? So you sell me a subscription, great, and it takes you 18 to 24 months to get up and running, and you're racing towards to get the production facility up and running before the end of the tax year, and usually for most people it is December. So you go live in November or December, and what happens? That's when your solar production is at the lowest point in the middle of winter in the Northeast. So I've been waiting around. I haven't heard from you for almost 2 years, and then you send me a bill. And the credits that I'm getting are probably not very high because the production volumes are low. You're setting yourself up for a nightmare. And 20 months, I usually like to point out, is the average gestation period of an elephant. And if you haven't forgotten, the problem is it's very much like a pregnant elephant, because can you tell the difference between a pregnant elephant and a non-pregnant elephant? I sure can't. And I grew up in India. So you're waiting around for 20 months, and then you get a bill, and you don't see the savings. How can this business model possibly work? And that's exactly the challenge that a lot of those community solar providers are facing today. So, but even in the billing mechanism, there is all kinds of headaches that you got to worry about, because first of all, there are no standards. By the way, everything that I'm saying is only true outside of Texas. Texas is probably the only place where this life is actually easy, where you don't have restrictions on who can own the solar. And the billing is probably the most critical point, because when you're looking at billing, you as a CSSP, community solar service provider, you could be an independent person, or you could be a supplier, or you could be a utility. So when it comes to sending you the bill, I will send you the bill for the subscription, and the savings is actually coming to you depending on whether you're in a regulated state or a deregulated state. It can come from one portion of it can come from the utility, which is the T&D charges, and the supply portion of the credit is going to come to you from the supplier, and the bill is going to come from the CSSP. So the whole question is, how do you put it all together? The customer has to put it all together in order to make sense to see if this is worth the time, which of course, none of us, how many of us actually read the energy bill, let alone put 3 of them together and figure out whether that makes sense to continue with that investment. And as a result, the industry has had significant challenges in keeping this going. And the billing transactions, given that there is no EDI or any similar standards, the transactions are a royal mess. There's nothing we can do about it. So those are primarily some of the wonderful lessons that we have learned. And for those of you who have played in the community solar business, you know Minnesota is the country's leading community solar provider state. And Massachusetts is number 2, and the rest of the states are just catching up. There's a lot of activity, especially after the 2018 elections, especially in the Midwest, when several states changed hands in terms of governorships. So this is very much growing. In fact, Illinois is a classic example where they have created, they had a 400 megawatt auction, and they were vastly oversubscribed. They were oversubscribed by a factor of 5. So this is very much up and going. And so thank you very much.
We do have time for a few questions. For question number 1 is, in your experience as community solar, what's the default rate from residential customers not ending up paying and people getting burned?
Very high. Very high.
Very high.
Very high. I've heard numbers as much as 18%, which is ridiculous, because your typical utilities bad pay rate is less than 1%, and even for suppliers it's much lower than anything like 18%.
Right. And what does Hanson Technologies do in the community solar space?
In fact, we work on both sides of the fence. We work with providers as well as with utilities. And in fact, a lot of what I'm talking about came out of my experience in the last 2 years. We've been working very closely with a little company called XL Energy in Minnesota and Colorado, where solar power, XL Energy has been very much well advanced, well ahead of the rest of a lot of the utilities in renewable energy, wind and solar. So we've been working with them. And so managing the whole billing process as well as related settlements, PPAs, all of those, we have been working with them closely on that.
One more question. Anybody have another question? Anybody on community solar? Okay, round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you very much.